Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in just a minute. My name is Layla Subani from the Center for Educational Equity. To the returning attendees, welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're happy to have you. We are at our third session of the webinar series, and we just wanted to thank you again for all of your continued support and attendance. Today, we'll be highlighting youth voices and experiences as we explore ways in which we can ignite youth civic action. Your input is valuable, so please engage with one another in the chat box. And you could also have the ability or the option to ask questions to the panel using the question and answer function, where you have the option to submit questions anonymously. If you are directing your question to someone in particular, please be sure to indicate that when you're sending it in. The sessions will be recorded, so keep an eye out for an email with instructions on how to access these recordings. And finally, at the end of the session, you'll have another opportunity to provide input through a survey that will pop up in your browser, and it will also be sent to your emails. So let's begin.
Hi, welcome, and thanks for joining Mending the Fabric of Democracy, Teaching Civic Readiness. I'm Michael Rebell, the Executive Director of the Center for Educational Equity at Teachers College, Columbia University, one of the organizations that is co-hosting this webinar series. Hundreds of people attended the first two sessions, not only from all over New York, but from around the country. And we're very pleased that you're joining us for this exciting third session on igniting youth civic action. Let me tell you briefly why we think that this topic and this series are of critical importance at this time. Our country's civic health is in acute crisis. The events of January 6th were alarming, not just because of the fact that thousands of people violently stormed our nation's capital, but as a wake-up call regarding the depths of ignorance about basic constitutional and democratic values, not only among these insurrectionists, but also among the public at large. Half our citizens, including one of our US senators, cannot name the three branches of government. Only 24% of a national sample of high school students were able to reach the proficiency level on the latest NAEP Civics exam. Clearly, our schools have not done a proper job in preparing students for civic participation. Nevertheless, schools remain one of the few places in our highly polarized society where people from diverse political, economic, and cultural backgrounds can come together in a setting where rational discussion and understanding of differing views can be prized and rewarded. That's why it's so important that schools take seriously their responsibility for mending the fabric of our democracy. And as you'll hear this afternoon, why it's so important that young people themselves become a part of the solution to society's civic ills. Every one of our students throughout New York State has a right under the state constitution to the opportunity for a sound basic education. One that, as the Court of Appeals, New York's highest court, has stated, means that every student is entitled to develop the skills he or she needs to function productively as a civic participant capable of voting and serving on a jury. I'm pleased to note that the Board of Regents has begun to take serious steps to implement this right. In 2016, they expanded the stated outcomes of education in New York State from preparing students to be college and career ready to preparing students to be college, career, and civically ready. They also have appointed a task force that has been developing specific proposals to promote civic readiness in concrete terms. Another important recent development in our state is that leading education groups, civic groups, and civil rights organizations, as well as scholars, youth leaders, and individuals have come together to form the Democracy Ready New York Coalition. The aim of the coalition is to work with each other and with the regents to make civic preparation a high priority for all schools throughout New York State. The Democracy Ready New York Coalition is co-sponsoring today's forum. And I'd like to now turn to Professor Shira Epstein, an active member of our coalition, to tell you more about today's session.
Hello again. I'm Shira Epstein, Associate Professor and Program Director of Social Studies Education at the City College of New York. I'm happy to welcome you to the third webinar in Democracy Ready New York's month-long series on youth civic readiness. So far, hundreds of us have come together from across New York State, representing countless sectors and initiatives to learn about essential components of civic readiness and identify ways we all can advocate for robust and equitably available civic learning opportunities for all youth. 2 weeks ago, we launched the series by talking about media literacy and the importance of preparing youth to be critical consumers of all the information that comes their way. Last week, we turned to the topic of discussing controversial issues and how youth can engage in even the most contentious debates of our day. This afternoon, we will focus on the topic of youth civic action and how it is ignited and supported in and out of schools. Today's panel will feature the impressive work educators and young people are doing to help make real change in their communities and beyond. Speaking of action, this webinar series is not a spectator sport. Please draw on the ideas and examples shared each week to ask what you can do to make sure that a high-quality education prioritizing civic readiness is available to all youth. If each of us takes action to advance a civic agenda that prioritizes media literacy, open and productive discussion of controversial issues, and youth civic action, we have a real chance of mending the fabric of our democracy. 2 more smaller points. First, join us once more next week on March 25th to talk with New York leaders about their role. It is our students' right to receive an education that prepares them for democracy, and we have good ideas of what should be included in this education. Next week, we will meet with influential leaders about how to make this right a reality. Panelists include Betty Rosa, New York State Education Commissioner, and Shelley Mayer, Chair of the Education Committee in the New York State Senate. Second, please use the Democracy Ready website as a resource. Visit this site for information on the various session topics and resources for action. I now hand the mic over to Rashid Duraso, Civics Program Director for Democracy Prep Public Schools, who will be moderating today's panel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Epstein, for that introduction. Once again, I'm Rashid Duraso, Civics Program Director at Democracy Prep Public Schools, a K-12 network of 22 schools founded with the explicit goal of preparing the next generation of changemakers. We believe deeply that young people are the architects and heralds of a kinder, more equitable, more inclusive world. And it is for this reason that I'm so thrilled to be moderating today's panel on igniting youth civic action. It's a topic of profound importance to me, both personally and professionally. In the last year, we've witnessed large-scale public responses to police brutality, voter disenfranchisement, climate change, inhumane immigration policies, a contentious election, and disparities in the response to COVID-19. They have revealed systemic inequities in our country in a way that cannot be ignored. In particular, the pandemic and movements for racial justice have accelerated shifts in the ways our communities operate, and they likewise have expanded our collective political imagination. We see now that sweeping change is possible. The charge for reform has been led by a diverse coalition of activists, and chief among them have been young people. According to a recent report from the Tufts University Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, there's been a remarkable increase in youth activism across a variety of fields. 55% of voting eligible young people cast a ballot in the 2020 election, surpassing the 2008 record of 51%. The number of young people attending marches, volunteering with political campaigns, and informing others about their rights have nearly doubled. Young people are seizing their power and defying every misconception that they are too young to understand or influence the governance of their communities. They have a stake in the decisions that shape their lives, and they understand that the future of our democratic society lies in their hands. Our young people are asserting with great conviction that they have a right and a responsibility to effect positive change by any conceivable means. The increase in youth activism highlights the critical need for quality civics education, particularly for members of historically marginalized communities. Young people have shown us that our definition of active citizenship must be more inclusive and expansive than it's ever been. We must continue to make way for them to shape their own future. We've come together today to honor and learn from a number of young people and educators who are striving to improve the lives of others through passionate and well-informed action. Our goals are to better understand how young activists approach their work, as well as learn strategies to ensure educators and adult allies are supporting them. Let's meet our panelists. Will each panelist please state their name, school, district, and school, and which organization or cause you're representing today? We'll start with Ahmed.
Hello, my name is Ahmed Sesay. I'm a 2019 graduate of Classical High School in Providence, Rhode Island, and I am representing myself as a plaintiff on the case Cook versus Raimondo, which is the case to establish a right to education under the United States Constitution.
Thank you and welcome. Next, we'd like to hear from Amber.
Hi, my name is Medina. I'm a senior and one of the leaders of my student government at Urban Assembly School for Leadership Empowerment. So I'm currently part of the New York Youth Civics Initiative, MYCI, and as an executive board member and a movement correspondent, which is ensuring that to connect students to civic opportunities through the various interviews and articles that I make. And I'm also part of Why Vote as a peer leader to help engage students in thoughtful discussions and get them involved civically at and beyond the ballot box.
Welcome, Medina, and I apologize about the error in the beginning. Next, we'd like to hear from Brisa.
Hi, my name is Brisa Pereira, and I am a junior in Union Square Academy for Health Sciences. I'm 16 years old, and today I'll be talking about how my school has fought for lead-free drinking water to improve students' access to good water.
Thank you. Welcome. Next, we have Martine.
Hi, all. My name is Martine. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a high school junior. I'm obviously at school right now in the Syracuse City School District. I go to Nottingham High School. I'm here representing the Democracy Ready New York Youth Leadership Initiative, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on in the panel.
Thank you and welcome. Next, we have Thea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Thea Mcfaun. I'm a school administrator in the North Colony Central School District in upstate New York. I'm also the founder of the Capital Region Institute for Human Rights, and we focus on providing opportunities for young people to engage in social justice work.
Thank you. Welcome, Thea. And David.
Hi, I'm David Edelman. I have the pleasure of being Brisa's teacher. I'm a social studies teacher at Union Square Academy for Health Sciences, which is a new public high school with a career and technical focus in New York City. I strongly believe that action civics is the path to real, relevant, rigorous, and relationship-oriented learning that will empower a new generation of student leaders, just like Brisa, and also educators to think beyond their classroom walls. And you can learn more about me, my students, and see examples of my students' activism with Generation Citizen at my teaching website, which is www.cagebustingclassrooms.com. And I put a link into the chat as well.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks everyone once again. In order to ensure that all of our attendees have as deeply meaningful an experience as possible, I'd like to be certain that our webinar is grounded in some shared understandings. Prior to diving into the conversation, we're going to have our educators set the stage for us. So I'll start with you, David. Can you please provide us with a working definition of civic action?
I'd say civic action is a combination of activism, service learning, project-based learning, action planning. Basically, going back to what I first said when I introduced myself, real, relevant, rigorous, relationship-oriented learning, everything that real-world learning should be. And I'm happy to show you some examples. I think what's nice about this is given the fact that we're all via Zoom, I can share my screen and I can show you what my students are working on.
Sure, please.
Can I go ahead? Okay. So what I'm going to show you right now, this is an actual presentation that my students created collaboratively based upon what Brisa mentioned is this year's Action Civics project. It's something that we've been working on for a number of years. And so you should pay close attention to the sample results on this chart. It speaks to a letter that we got from the New York City Department of Education in 2017, which showed that we have highly elevated lead levels in our school, like many other old buildings and old schools. Perhaps your school or the school that you went to, or perhaps this is a problem in your neighborhood as well. It's a huge problem all across the United States. But perhaps you got a letter like this if you're a teacher, if you're a student, you were handed a letter like this to bring home to your parents and nothing necessarily happens with it. It's just shared communication. What I take so much pride in is this was the impetus of my students working closely with myself and elected officials, doing something about it, doing something for their school, also doing something for their city and their state as well. And so some of the things that we accomplished, this, by the way, is something called the Advocacy Hourglass. It's a tool that Generation Citizen, which helps empower teachers and students to do action civics, shared with us. Because one of the big parts of civic learning is doing action research and action planning and thinking critically about what are community issues, focus issues, and what the root causes of those things are. So for instance, in our school, we had a lack of access to water. Students weren't using the water fountains because of the lead levels and because they were old and they didn't work well. And so as a result, we had students that were missing class time trying to get water from empty or locked classrooms. And so our students decided this would be our focus issue, something that they wanted to focus on. And they thought about why was this such a problem? We talked about the lack of data that existed on this issue at a school level. We helped make a map of all the schools in New York City that faced this problem as well. And so our goal was to foster lead-free drinking water. There's no safe level of lead. Even though the EPA sets a limit at 15 parts per billion, there's no safe levels of lead. And then we had to think about who do we want to target for this work too. There's things that we can do at our school level, but we also wanted to reach out to our elected officials. So people like our mayor, members of city council as well. We got to know our members of city council, including Carolina Rivera, who is the city council member that represents District 2, where our school is, and also bureaucratic offices like the Environmental Protection Office, which actually issued every student in my school a lead test kit so they can test their drinking water at home. And then we thought of tactics. What's in our locus of control? So for instance, we used participatory budgeting money to have a school-wide vote, which funded new water fountains at our school with bottle fillers and filtration systems. And then we also lobbied for change through the use of social media. And we also would rally support as well. Like, students had the opportunity to get on social media and also to make phone calls or send emails to their elected officials to try to promote change on this issue. And you can see these were the four issues that we came up with in terms of how we can promote change on this issue.
I think this is fantastic, David, and we would love to return to this in a moment. Later in the panel, we're going to actually provide a little bit more time for us to dive into the specific things we're doing. But I do think that the structural focus and the very intentional approach to developing solutions to community problems is really compelling here. The model you're describing is moving way beyond just a one-off service project and teaching young folks how to embrace a more sustainable and comprehensive form of civic agency. So we definitely appreciate that. And I'd like to pivot now, and Thea, I'd love to hear you add some additional layers of nuance to our working definition of civic action as well.
Thanks, Rashid. And I do value David's example. I think it's a really great way to engage students in problem solving around issues that they're living with daily. And so taking that as a focus and using that as the impetus for important work is such a valuable opportunity for young people. And as I think about civic action, I think about what's great about it is that it's so broad and that there are multiple entry points for folks that are interested in making a difference in their communities. So we might think about service, right? For many of us, service and service opportunities was our very first place in school or in our community where we gave back, whether it was thinking about a major issue that was going on, something minor, or but just thinking about how can I help other people? How can I reach out and connect? And I feel like service is such a really accessible way for all young people to think about civic action. I also think about peer education as a form of civic action. When we share our knowledge and expertise with others, we build power and we can shift perspectives and lead to greater understanding of complex issues. It's also helpful because it helps teens get more practice dealing with multiple perspectives. What do we do when we're in a conversation with someone and they have a different point of view? And so just sharing that valuable information that young people have with each other is such great practice. And then when I also think about civic action, I think about advocacy and the type of work that was described previously. So thinking about what are those action steps? What do they look like? How do we encourage others to join our cause? And then once we do that, what are our targets? Who are the folks that we know we need to influence? And how do we access those levers of power? And so I really do feel that what's great about civic action is that it's really accessible. And as long as we give teens opportunities to practice those skills, there's nothing they can't do.
Thank you, Thea. And I really love the idea of providing multiple entry points to young folks to really get engaged, because we understand whether it is service or it is peer education or it is advocacy, there are different skill sets that our scholars can really be drawing from to ensure that they're having multiple at-bats with using their voices and bringing about positive change. Thank you. I'd like for us to shift now to our youth activists. A couple of questions for them, and we will return to our educators momentarily. Welcome back. Now that we have a framework for thinking about civic action, I'd like you all to tell us about a form of civic action that you've recently taken or are currently involved in. So what's the problem you are addressing, and what approach are you taking to address it? We'll start with you, Martine.
Awesome. So my action is related to equitably funding schools across New York State. So back in May of 2020, so this was like a quarantine involvement that picked up, but I became involved with the Democracy Ready New York Youth Leadership Initiative. And we really were deep in brainstorming, like how can we make civic education a reality in every school across the state? And we realized that we could not do that unless our schools were well funded and equitably funded. So as the New York State budget season is now coming on us and they're trying to figure out legislation for that, we really wanted to push for it here. So our action is a letter to Governor Cuomo and the state government asking them that they equitably fund schools across the state, specifically with foundation aid. A few of you may be familiar, or a lot of you might be familiar with foundation aid is. But just to give a quick brief, it's the formula that was created from the 2006 Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit that Cuomo has so far failed to live up to. And that's demanding millions and billions of dollars for our students and for our schools like mine. So I'm actually gonna use this opportunity to plug our letter in the chat. We are accepting submissions and sign-ons through the weekend. So we really, really encourage all of you to sign on. And really on a more personal note, why this is so important is I think there's such a rhetoric in city schools and in the big five schools that, oh, we can't have that compared to a suburban school because we're broke. And that's like so often said. Teachers I've heard say who really believe deeply in our community, but just we understand that we don't have the resources, all the resources that we need. So I think that's a really important thing that we're not just uplifting these schools, but we are really investing in them as well.
Thank you so much for that. And we definitely encourage all of our attendees to follow the link in the chat to make sure that you're offering your support as well. Ahmed, same question. Would love to hear a little bit about your work and problem that you're addressing and the approach that you are taking to make the world a more equitable place for others.
All right. So the case that brought me here today was started on November 20. Well, no, it was started before then, but we formally filed the case on November 29th of 2018. And this case is basically stating that the state of Rhode Island has been denying students with the information and the education to be civically engaged. And basically, we're saying that the state is failing students with their whole education because they're not prepared to serve on a jury or know their rights or know how laws, become from bills to laws and things like that. And there's a lot of confusion there. So this is an issue that really affects all students. Some students in more underfunded districts more than others. But that case kind of just exposed to me the glaring holes in our education system. And students definitely deserve more than just a Band-Aid or something that's going to siphon them into just a career.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. There's often a conversation about the notion of a civic opportunity gap and a civic education gap. And we understand that in order to heal and advance our democracy, it's important that we're equipping our young folks with the capacity to understand how government works. And as Thea mentioned early, find different entry points and different ways to get involved. Definitely thank you for sharing that. We need to continue to ensure that all young people have access to equitable and robust civics education. Brisa, would love to hear about the work that you and Mr. Edelman have been doing together, along with your peers.
So today we're talking about how we helped improve our school's drinking water. My school partnered with Generation Citizen to improve students' drinking water, and we motivated our students to generate proposals on how we could better use funds to better our school community and our school's drinking water. We actually had a poll in our school, and we all voted for replacing the water fountains with new, safer drinking water. Now we have clean water, and now students don't have to go all day without, having clean water. Now people can stay hydrated.
That's wonderful. I would love for you to talk just a little bit more about the process that you and your peers really kind of went through to the deliberation process, and then how you arrived at consensus and said, yes, this is the thing we're going to commit to.
Yeah, so we decided that we could learn from German students. So German students actually visited our school, and we talked with them about how their water system works and how water works in their schools. They helped us, they helped educate us on how we could have clean water. And they actually talked to a lot of our students and convinced them that we need to fight to improve our school's water systems. And that's what encouraged people to vote for the new water fountains.
Wonderful. Thank you. I definitely think that the ability for different groups of young folks to really talk to each other, inspire one another, and show one another what is possible when you put your energy and your efforts and your skills together is really fantastic. So it's really cool also to see that global citizenship component where scholars, young folks from different communities are able to speak to one another and inspire one another to continue to remain active. I'd love to hear from you, Medina. Would you tell us a little bit about your activism and just some of the processes that kind of go through your mind as you all are striving to change the world?
Yeah, of course. Talking about my civic action, me being part of MNYCI, I'm specifically a movement correspondent. So my role is to, reach out to organizations, reach out to individuals who are working on, enduring issues that really speaks to the youth. And from that, I interview and create articles as a way to help share to students who are struggling to find an opportunity or don't really know where to start in this, I guess, this civic environment. Because I think the biggest problem is there's a lack of accessibility when it comes to these opportunities, and there's so many opportunities out there. It's just that it's not there for them to see. And NYCI does a really good job as a way to create this platform with, with series of resources that students can look into, and it helps in a way make activism more equitable to all. And I do have a series of articles starting from Andrea, who's part of Youth Over Guns, and basically talking about from an activist sort of lens. And then my other one is Journals of Color, which is more in terms of a discussion of more organizational. And so it's different scales that I do talk about. And on the website, there are other resources out there. There are other articles of other opportunities. I can definitely put them in the chat. So you can definitely check them out at nyci.org.
Thank you. And can you tell us again, NYYCI stands for?
Yes, it stands for New York Youth Civics Initiative.
Thank you so much. I'm really moved by this because I think that this is a very clear example, especially for our folks in the audience, our attendees, of the power of linking some of those core academic skills that we sometimes think are separate from civic engagement, and an application in a way that is genuinely bringing light to a number of community issues. Would love to hear how some of the educators in your school, Medina, moved you from writing for class to writing to change society.
In terms of writing, right? Just want to make
sure. In terms of writing, or if someone just inspired you to use your voice, I'm just very curious to see that linkage.
Yeah, definitely. I believe my school community really made this sort of space where I'm able to express how I feel or express my thoughts or anything that speaks of my interest. So it definitely does play a role when it comes to interviewing, when it comes to writing, where I become comfortable with the person that I'm discussing with or the person that I'm interviewing with. And it really helps me have this deeper conversation because I know that I'm learning, but also knowing that others are also reading this and are taking away a positive light from this, and we'll do something about it.
Thank you so much. I would love to now pivot back to our educators to ask them a couple of follow-up questions as well. So we've heard some of the ways that young people are taking action to challenge the status quo and advocate for causes that are important to them. Many of us are likely wondering how educators are creating the kinds of civic learning experiences that create a sense of confidence and efficacy in young folks. So Thea, I'd love to start with you. What does civic action look like for you and your students in the Institute? And what specific understandings or strategies do you apply to your work to ensure that those experiences are transformative for the young people you educate?
Honestly, we follow the lead of the young people that participate in our programs. And so even before we meet the students who are participating, we ask them, what is a topic that you are passionate about? What is something that you wish to learn more about when you attend? And we model our program based on those responses. And so as young people show up, we've made sure that they have opportunities to connect with leaders in the field of climate justice, of immigration rights, of racial justice. So that way, when they do come to our event and our programs, we know that we're making sure that what they've come for, which is to learn more, to hear from experts, and to be in community with other teens who have similar concerns, that they then have mentors and the guidance to feel that, okay, I've gone to this training, I've participated in these workshops, I've met other teens across the nation that have similar concerns, and we've thought about these issues. And after we've done all this thinking, we realized that there are ways that we can build power together, that we can use our voice to make change, whether it's in our immediate school community. And so thinking about, I'll give you a brief example. Several of our teens last year wanted to really work on this topic of inclusive health class curriculum. And so how do you do that? How do you have a change in curriculum where you're the young person, you're not a teacher, you're not an administrator, but you recognize that you have to find a way to compel those people that have power to see that this is an important need, that we're not quite meeting the needs of all kids with our with our current health and sex ed curriculum. And so they were able to work with partner organizations, look at models, and then present that to their teachers, to their school administrators, and to their school boards, and be able to see real change put into place and feel like, you know what, I have a voice. I don't have to wait to be a leader. I'm a leader right now. And so for us, it's really just providing those opportunities for young people to take what they're learning, to recognize that they have opportunities right now to make a difference and to improve that school environment or their community for one another. And so we hope that through our program, and also just through recognizing that they now have new friends who have similar interests, that they stay in contact with those teens and they continue that work.
You know, there are three things that stood out to me as I was listening to you that I think are really important for us to underscore for our audience. The first is the power of simply asking young people what they'd like to do. I think especially in the education world, there's a pressure to always have a plan and move forward with something. And if you're not backwards planning it, then you're doing your intellectual prep. But simply speaking to young folks and asking them what they care about is super important. And I think the additional step is building relationships. I heard that throughout what you were saying. So whether it's peer-to-peer or peer with mentor or peer with community members, I think that's something for us all to reflect on as well, the importance of just building strong relationships with folks, because that's really at the heart of the work that we do with any kind of civic activism. And then the last thing that you said that really stood out was the idea of taking action right now. I think it's very easy sometimes for us to also stick to this abstract concept of civic engagement, where we're just saying, oh yeah, when you're an adult, you'll be able to vote. When you're an adult, you'll be able to X, Y, and Z. But there are so many things on the school level, and we've seen through both our panelists and through young folks we've interacted with or heard about in the news, that it really can be as simple as there's a policy in my school that I don't think is equitable. You know, there's something in my neighborhood that I think is not right, and I'm going to get into good trouble, you know, whatever the case may be. But we understand that it's not in the abstract, and it is accessible to young folks of all ages. So thank you so much for that. And David, I'd love to ask you the same question, and this is a great opportunity for us to really return to some of the really engaging and interesting data that you were showing us previously. But just to reframe the question for everyone listening in case they had missed it, I'm interested in hearing what civic action looks like for the students in your classroom. And specifically, how do you and your colleagues approach the work to ensure that it aligns with the Generation Citizen Advocacy Hourglass that you shared with us earlier?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. And again, it looks a little bit different during remote learning versus in-person learning, but I'm happy to show you both. And there's a lot of similarities. And there's a lot of creative things that you could do during remote learning as well, in terms of, you know, having students, in this case, are the project I was talking to you about most recently, like testing their water at home. It's a great way to get parents involved also in student learning, and then really kind of build consensus and broad outreach. You know, I think it's the most meaningful homework assignment I ever gave to students. I hear that all the time. You know, what resonated with you that we did in class, and it was, you know, testing their water at home and getting their parents involved with that. But let me show you a little bit more. And I can perhaps speak not only to this project, but what Thea said is, and I agree, for number one, a great way to get started is always to ask students, what are the problems in your community, right? When you talk to your friends and family, what are the problems in your community? So my students create all sorts of action civics projects, and you can see like some of them here, and you can see our students presenting at Civics Day. This is a forum and it was virtual this year, put on where students get to collaborate with students across New York City to learn about the problems in their community, what they did about it. For instance, here, my students were advocating that New York is one of 7 states that doesn't require pharmacy techs to be certified. And that's why my students go to school, is to learn how to be pharmacy technicians. So they advocated for that, and actually got CVS to voluntarily decrease the ratio of pharmacists to pharmacy techs based upon our relationship with that organization. That's Brad Landers. He's a New York City Council member, and our students got to collaborate with him in regards to removing 50A, the policy that banned New York City police officers' misconduct reports from not being shared with the public. So those are some of my students' Action Civics projects. Students also give speeches at Civics Day as well. This was the bill actually that our students were working on in terms of making pharmacy tech certification a thing in New York State. So we partnered with legislators to work on that. We talked about participatory budgeting. You know, it doesn't take much, $2,000 of money. Let students decide how they want to spend the money. So these were all the proposals that students came up with. And again, they voted for this one to improve the water fountains at our school, which have bottle fillers and filtration systems. There they are. That's the one. Students actually were on the council to pick those out. That's students testing our water, samples of our water in school before school closed. That's the new water fountain that we have. Here's the map that I was telling you about, where we mapped every school in New York City that has elevated lead levels. Anything in red has lead levels above 15 parts per billion, which is the action level set by the EPA. And again, students work on these projects with me. This was something that we worked on over the summer. Students were motivated enough to continue working on that over the summer. We do participatory budgeting at a city council level as well. We focus on local history. We created a slavery in New York city-led walking tour. And because we were in remote learning, we made it virtual. We made a virtual slavery in New York walking tour. You can click on one of these and see a video of one of my students talking about a site in New York City that either was on the side of abolition or on the side of supporting slavery in New York City. And we also focus on human rights. And the last thing is voter registration. Last week was Civics Week in all of New York. What did you do for Civics Week? Well, I helped my students register to vote and to understand what's on the ballot come this June in the primary election and in November in the general election. So I think all of these kind of demonstrate some of the things that we're doing. Internships also. Get your students involved in internships. Don't just talk about these government agencies like the district attorney's office. Get them an internship in the district attorney's office. That's where they're going to learn the most.
Thank you. And you know, it's interesting because as I listened to you, I also thought about specifically that first example that you brought up about sending the kids home to test the water. And I feel like it speaks to the beauty of not only being an educator involved in civic education, but just an educator in general, that our work is truly just to transform the way young people see the world. And I think when you have them test and they realize, whoa, there's something wrong here that needs to be fixed, and it inspires them to take action, or when we show them what certain policies are, or let them know that in their state, there are certain programs that don't exist where they exist elsewhere, really just providing them the context and the supports as they discover where their passions lie. Where are the inconsistencies in what I expected in terms of how my society and community should operate? And then how do I actually get to the vision of the more just or the more accessible world that I want to live in? So thank you for that. I would like now to turn back to our youth activists to get a better sense of some of the mindsets that are informing their work. This first question is for Martine and Brisa. Do you see your civic work as directly related to issues in your own life? Or are you working in solidarity with others who are more directly affected by your target issue? And specifically, how does your personal investment or connection to the outcome of an issue have an impact on your activism? We'll start with you, Martine.
Perfect. I think definitely both. I think in some sense, I attend a Big Five, super underfunded city school, and our school community is great, but we lack resources in many ways that just schools 15 minutes from us and that are in different zip codes don't have that same problem. However, on the other hand, I do come from a background, and I come from a family that's able to get me resources I need. I have a laptop in a time of remote learning. And I've really been able to gain skills for myself of self-advocacy that I think just aren't as well taught. And that's, sort of another reason why we need so much funding for our school. Just to plug the letter one more time, I think there's so many opportunity structures that can be solved if we just invest more in certain communities. So that being said, I think context is really important when we're in this work. I think if I'm on a regional call with, and I'm the only student or one of the only students from a city school, like you better believe I'm gonna be talking all about our lack of funding and how our school cultures are so different because of that. However, if I'm more on a school scale and it's a bit more local, I think I like to adopt more of a solidarity and listening ear, just understanding that my students my peers have very diverse experiences that should also be uplifted.
Thank you. I really like this idea of being adaptable as a really core skill, to look at your context and understand when it's time to speak up and step forward, and when it's also time to listen and learn in order to do a better job of moving forward in pursuit of a goal. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Brisa, we'd love to hear from you as well. Do you see your civic work as directly related to issues in your own life, or are you working in solidarity with others? And if there is that gap, how does your personal investment change depending on how close or far you are from an issue?
I was also personally affected by this issue in school. Like they mentioned before, kids would go the entire day without drinking tap water. We would go the whole class period trying to get safe water. This project has also helped me understand that we can use our voices to talk to representatives and ask them to help perform. For example, we emailed and we messaged. For example, some of our students messaged AOC, and we asked for more attention. We asked that more students be educated on this issue. And without Mr. Edelman getting us involved, I really wouldn't understand how dangerous any amount of lead is in water.
Thank you. I guess when I'm thinking a lot about these issues, it's interesting too, some things that are super personal and local to us also are part of a much larger issue and on a much larger scale. So when I think about access to water, I was reading a recent study from the WHO that was saying there are almost 800 million people around the world who don't have ready access to water. And we know that that has an impact on their ability to perform daily functions outside of just health, but folks who have to find different ways to seek water. So it is interesting how things can be both super local, but also global simultaneously. It's often the case that civic action doesn't immediately lead to change. When this happens, how do you still move forward with a feeling that you can make a difference? I'd love to hear from you, Medina.
Of course. I mean, especially when it comes to work like this, there are certain points in time where it feels like nothing's really happening, or knowing that like change is not going to come the next day or overnight. But I am still grateful to kind of be part of this platform and helping to create this platform, because I know that I'm still helping people. I'm still reaching out to individuals who don't have any opportunities to reach out, to opportunities to look forward to, and I'm grateful to be building this community with them to combat the issues that matters to them a lot. And especially for me personally, I'm part of this movement. I'm part of, as a youth individual, I'm part of this movement to help branch out to other individuals like me, and it has a lot of value and it really means a lot to me.
Thank you. Really beautifully said. Now, this work also doesn't go smoothly always. Can you talk about a key struggle that you faced and how you've worked to overcome it? Ahmed, we'd love to start with you for this.
Sure. I think a key struggle of this work is just acknowledging that, I think, as Medina just said, yeah, change is not going to happen overnight. As much as we would love it to happen overnight, it's not going to happen overnight. And oftentimes when you're part of organizing, and especially relational organizing, I think that's a common theme that everyone's speaking on and bringing up that I think is super important. You can get tired, you can get burnt out, and it's important to stay true to yourself and to be authentic and to just acknowledge that, you know, people have needs and people have wants and people need free time and people, you know, need to relax. So this work is something that can get very all encompassing because it affects your whole life. Like public policy and civics affect everyone's life down to like the last detail. So when it comes to this work, just be really authentic to yourself and know that what you're bringing to the table just depends on how you're doing internally, and that will reflect in your work. So be authentic to how you're feeling.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of power in reminding folks you need to be authentic both to yourself and really reflecting on what your priorities are and understanding sometimes and having the humility to say, my priorities don't always align with other people's, and I can't force people to always adopt my priorities, understanding that everyone's coming from different places with different things going on, different contexts, but we understand that we need to still find a way to bridge those gaps and build consensus and finding that other way to communicate how important something is to you until it does become a priority to others. And so I do think in addition to authenticity, there's this element of humility and flexibility that I think all of you have talked about so far that's super important. From your perspective, what does it take for youth and adult allies to work together productively in civic life? I'd love to start with you, Brisa.
I'm sorry, my audio cut off. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. So from your perspective, what does it take for youth and adult allies to work together productively in civic life?
I think a lot of students lack good role models. I think it is very important to have an adult guide you and explain how important it is to use your voice. A lot of students don't understand the change and the impact that their voice can have on others. And yeah, a key example is how with remote learning, I did not know where to start, using my voice. And as soon as I got involved, as soon as I entered Mr. Edelman's class, he posted dozens of extra credit assignments where we could join these activities and join these organizations. He's had so many class guests who have explained to us what we can do. And he's just really gotten me involved, and I'm super grateful for that.
Thank you. Thea, we'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I really feel that a key part of it is for adults to recognize that we need to get out of the way. Like the young people, if they need us, if they need support, that they will let us know. But it's okay to trust young people and to recognize that they're fully aware of where the problems are, whether it's in their school or community or national issues that they feel need time and attention. And when we allow students to have choice and influence in terms of the topics that we explore with them, in terms of the projects that we allow them to help co-design with us, that's authentic learning. But it's also allowing them to practice the very skills that this entire webinar has been about, like developing those civic learning practices. And so I do feel that for me as an adult and as an educator, my role is to provide resources and support. And that support might look like connecting students to legislators or to journalists in our community to help amplify their voice. It might look like helping students develop a social media plan, right? So that way that they can further broaden their audience when they're talking about a specific issue or a need. And so I feel it's really important that adults recognize that our job is to be on the side, to facilitate, to support, and to remove barriers so that young people can take the mic and lead and help us understand where have we fallen short, right? What do we need to help? What do we need to recognize so that way they can help us make this world more just and sustain our democracy?
Thank you so much. In addition to stepping out of the way, I think it's so important for us to understand, especially as we were listening to our youth panelists earlier, sometimes there's tremendous learning and growth that happens when you're not as successful as you'd like to be. And when adults kind of own everything, or educators own everything, and don't create that space for experimentation and sometimes failure, which we know is really just an opportunity to learn more, we're stunting growth as opposed to promoting success or promoting growth. So it's a really important distinction that you provided of just, we can be a resource, but it should not mean that we are owning everything. Because when we let go of the proverbial bicycle and take off the training wheels, there needs to be some kind of familiarity with struggle and familiarity with failure, as well as conflict, because it's real, it's part of the work. So as we continue with that thread, I'd love to have a couple of our youth activists inform some of the educators in our audience. What do older adults and educators need to know about supporting youth civic engagement and activism? What do we get wrong? Medina, would love to hear from you first.
Yeah, of course. And both of you guys kind of touched on mostly the adult's role in this when it comes to supporting students. Because usually what I see, what I expect adults to have like softer expectations when it comes to dealing with especially with the youth, because the youth are like they haven't have the full experience of the world or of the work in comparison to the adults. And by taking it easy on them allows more room for students to feel supported, that hey, I can learn to grow, I can learn to be more expressive of myself without having to be so influenced by adults. So going off of that, making sure that adults don't put too much of their perspectives or biases onto students, and create enough of a space to help students lead in their own discussions, so that they can help come up with their own perspectives and their own ideologies.
Thank you. I think there's a really important aspect of showing grace and understanding that it is a learning process. And I think it's really important as well, as you have said, and as we all have said, it's just allowing people's identities to show through, young people's identities and their passions to be genuinely cultivated. Let's shift to a broader and more institutional focus. What role should schools in general play in providing students learning opportunities to develop the skills and mindsets to be civically engaged and take civic action? We'd love to start with you, Ahmed.
All right. This is a really great question. And I think that schools need to, as Michael Rebell stated at the beginning of all this, how I think the Board of Regents changed it from being career ready and career and college ready. I don't know. I think it was career and college ready, to be like instead civic career. So adding the word civics to like the core of education, because what we're saying is that the 14th Amendment of our Constitution is being denied, and students are demanding a constitutional amendment that states that the right to education should also include being civically prepared. And it's the right to education isn't even like a given right now. So schools really have to acknowledge that students right now are just being failed in terms of knowing how voting really works, in terms of just having a basic understanding of like what ward they live in, what senators represent them, what representatives represent them, what council people represent them, and what rights they have. A lot of students don't even really know how rights work in and out of schools. And I think as the place that students spend most of their lives, they have to be educating them on how to live their life and how to productively be a citizen in this country and within the world, make decisions for themselves. I think that's like the most important thing out of everything, because when people don't know their rights, bad things happen. We see that constantly. And this is something that this is not something that I just do after school anymore. This organizing policy work is what I do for full-time work now. So When I talk about just like people speaking on their experiences and their stories as marginalized people, as frontline communities, this is pivotal to introducing change. In the city of Providence, we have a committee that I work with. I'm a project team member, and we create environmental policy to hopefully affect change within our sorry, my cat's all up on here, and within our city. And we have seen the same scrapyard set on fire 50 times, and they have gone to court 50 times. And the same thing happens over and over and over and over. So we need to get students to radicalize and think in a way that they can actually make change. And that's all I'll say on that.
Thank you. Would love to ask the same question to Martine.
Yeah, sure. I think really we need to just first name that school institutions and educational institutions really are civic pillars. They're not just building students, they're building citizens. And I think that's been iterated and reiterated a lot here, but I think that's just very, very important to know. I'll also say, I think reframing how we understand civics, not physics, sorry, I had that earlier this morning. I think civics, often we just think of voting, and voting is really important, but it's not the only tool. And also voting can leave out groups who like immigrants and refugees who aren't US citizens, people like me who just aren't 18 yet. Yeah, physics is cool too, I must say. But I think really understanding that civics is a lifelong journey, and it does not start when you're 18, when you can cast your ballot. It really goes on and is a lifelong journey. And I think that being said, we really need to put our schools in the 21st century, not just that, but in 2021. We need to understand what we presently need to be talking about. I think it's okay for on January 7th of this year for all educators and teachers to stop their curriculum and to talk with their students about how they're feeling, and understanding that. I think dialogue led civics is incredibly important, because really how to engage students is through their lived experiences and through their identities, especially in such diverse communities where you can really understand and gain a lot of knowledge based on that. So I think, just to like wrap up everything I've said, civics is really a lifelong journey that can't just fit into 1 year curriculum, but I think we can do the best we can within that year. And that being said, keep it very present and keep it present within that year of curriculum and beyond.
Thank you. Brisa and then Medina, we'd love to hear both of your thoughts as well.
Like I mentioned before, I think a key struggle a lot of students are facing right now is finding these opportunities for civic engagement. I think schools should require teachers to provide their students with a lot more opportunities and guidance. Unfortunately, not all students have teachers that encourage them to be involved. And like I mentioned before, students don't understand the power that their voice have. So I think that's definitely something our schools need to work on, and it's definitely something that we can accomplish.
Similarly, what I've mentioned earlier on when it came to adults. So similarly, schools should also hold spaces to, when it comes to like, I guess, controversial topics or topics that impact students a lot, and kind of having this discussion where different perspectives are invited, and it's in a way, it'll be like a learning environment for students getting to hear from one another, and learn how to be supportive of the other's opinion without bringing them down, without causing any sort of fights or anything. Just respectfully disagreeing, learning why they disagree, learning from those perspectives, understanding like biases, understanding like privileges that one may have over the other, and all this in a respectful manner. And in that way, it'll help lead to thoughtful conversations when it does come to these issues.
Thank you, everyone, for the thoughts that you've contributed to this section. But now let's actually shift our focus one final time. I'd love for our audience to leave with some actionable steps to advance their personal activism or their support of youth activists. To our youth panelists again, we've talked about what adults should do and what schools should do, but what advice do you have for other youth looking to get civically active. We'll start with you again, Martine.
Sure. I think really my biggest takeaway from organizing so far has been really think locally. I think we see a lot of national protests and marches, which are so important and incredible in changing that national conversation. But I think we can sort of shift that from maybe the Instagram infographic that talks about a national issue to a more local one. An example of that is we can look at disparities that exist by zip code and how infrastructures can create division and segregation in 2021. But thinking, and that's a very national issue that exists in almost every American city. But I think looking more specifically to Syracuse, I know that the I-81 federal highway has split our city in half. So really understanding and making those local connections. I will plug history teachers love talking about local history. So if you're curious about this or want to continue that conversation, I really, really encourage that. And then one final thing, I think Generation Z were incredibly powerful, but we've also been in a space with adults for almost our entire life, and intergenerational organizing is so, so important. I think adults have been organizing for a while, and we have really important insights, but also listening to them as well.
Wonderful. Medina, Ahmed, and then Brisa. Same question to you all.
Yeah, sure. My advice would go, it's more specifically towards the youth. And I would say advice that I would give is to seek opportunities that speak of your interests. I think that's the most simplest thing, that when you're starting to look for opportunities, look at something that you are interested in. And it doesn't matter what you're interested in, like in terms of scale. It doesn't have to be something so fancy. It doesn't have to be something that, like, because for example, like if you're interested in art, if you're interested in making artwork, or if you're interested in doing business, if you're interested in doing like literally anything, it can all be easily tied in civically. And as long as you focus on your interests, you get to limit, like you get to pinpoint those opportunities. It helps limit your choices to those few organizations or few works that others have been doing, so that you can easily help join. And it doesn't matter your qualifications. Like you don't have to be extroverted, you don't have to be this big leader in front of the crowd. Like you can work behind the scenes. Like it all matters. That what only matters is the work that you're doing and the impact that you're making. The person behind it, it could be literally anybody.
That's before we transition, just have to point out that that's such an important sentiment, because I think there is a tendency for folks to want to be the big name, the one who's leading the charge. And I know that there's the speech about the drum major instinct from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that really addresses this, but wherever you are and however you're doing it, you are contributing. And we shouldn't be measuring it against how large your audience is or how deep the impact is, so much as making a change that you are at peace with and understanding that there's continuously more to do. Thank you for that point. Ahmed, sorry for the interruption.
No, that was really everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Medina, because I think there's a place for everyone and every experience when it comes to relational organizing. And then, as Martine said, intergenerational organizing. Like everyone has a different experience. Stop it, Dexter. Oh my goodness. I need to put you, get down. Everyone's experience is like powerful, and everyone has various intersections. Like all these protected, equal opportunity employment things like class, disability, race, creed, all these things affect your experience, even in public school. And I think to get more youth involved, you have to realize, like, why is the water in my school brown? Because everyone's been talking about lead in your school, and the water in my high school was brown. Like the water from the bubblers was brown. And thinking about it just made me a little bit emotional when I hear everyone talking about how they got involved with activism, because this is stuff that affects the place where you're supposed to be making a future for yourself. So please, if you really do want to get involved with organizing and trying to change your surroundings, try to pay attention to what's going on around you. Okay, Dexter, you need to chill. Pay attention to what is going on around you. And let me just move. because he clearly wants a table. And if you see meetings for like school board type things, and if you see spaces that are looking for students to really speak up, try to get into those spaces. And if you don't see those spaces, try to create those spaces by speaking to first the people that are within your school. And if that doesn't work, then you go to the next level, the school department. And if that doesn't work, superintendent. And if that doesn't work, keep escalating. Escalation was something that my org and the current org that I work with always use. That's a good tactic. Escalate until the problem is no longer something that you can ignore.
Thank you. In addition to that piece about escalation, I think it demands a patience and an orientation towards a long game. Sometimes, as we've mentioned numerous times throughout this discussion, it's like you might not see what you're looking for right away. So you do go to the next level, and you understand that if that doesn't work, there are additional levels, but the level of patience that's required and the persistence to continue to persevere, even in the face of those obstacles, is so important. Brisa, would love to hear any advice you have for youth activists as well.
For the students that want to get involved but are not sure where to start, you can start by simply asking your teachers to help you get involved. And if you can't do that, then you can research organizations that work with students to help you use your voice. For example, you can work with Mcfaun, Generation Citizen, or even Democracy Ready. These organizations are made to help and educate students use your voice. You can even talk to your peers and help inform each other on any important information that can help get each other civically active.
Thank you, and well put. Thea and David would love to hear the one piece of advice, the most important understanding that you would give to educators, administrators, or policymakers who are hoping to support youth in this work.
I would say that this work is essential to sustaining our democracy and ensuring we have a just society. And so as a result, we have to create space for young people within our schools, and for all the things that all the young people on our call shared today about being part of board meetings, being part of committees in our schools that make decisions about curriculum and about policy. Those experiences help to give them those tools and practice to be able to, as they get older, continue that work and to make a positive change in their communities. So I feel like my message would be, make sure that you are creating space that's informed by students and for students where they really do have an active voice in shaping the school that they're in.
Thank you. And David?
For policymakers, I would say fear is the great slayer of teaching and learning, and standardized testing is the great facilitator of fear and also the slayer of authentic learning. And that's not just my thought and the thought of many other educators, it's the thought of our students. So last year, one of my students' Action Civics projects was, how do we improve and foster authentic learning? And the pathway forward is to remove the premise of high stakes standardized testing. And just, look at what my students are doing and see and think about, is that measured by a standardized exam? What do you want kids doing? Do you want them doing test prep so they could do well on this test? Or do you want them doing something real, relevant, rigorous, and relationship oriented, like engaging in student-led activism? So that's my big pitch to policymakers. To teachers, to students, I think those are the other two groups. I don't think they need that much because they want to do this stuff. Teachers want meaningful opportunities to collaborate with their students. They want to engage in meaningful work, and there's too many barriers in front of them. Strip those barriers away, empower teachers, empower students to do these things. They want to work together. They'll find very meaningful ways to collaborate with one another. I mean, this year I got to work with science teachers who were super, super excited about having students test water in their classrooms. And we worked together. And that's what teachers want to do. It's these barriers that are put up in regards to policy when education is decided on this top-down basis and thrown upon people with often, well-intentioned meanings that I think creates this system of fear and stunts authentic learning. So teachers want to think beyond their classroom. They want students to have the most meaningful education opportunities ever. Empower students and teachers to do that.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience directed to our young folks here. How do you handle conflict with other students you're working with on civic action? As we've mentioned before, that there are a lot of priorities, a lot of personalities, a lot of relationship dynamics to navigate. So how do you actually deal with conflict?
I think it's important to remember that all students want the same thing. All students are fighting to have their voices heard, and it's hard enough as it is already. I think we have to be understanding, and I also think it prepares us for what real life is like, because you're not always going to agree with everyone you meet.
I would just add, I think so often we'll be on Zooms all day and we'll be organizing, and we can maybe consider ourselves organizers, but we're like teenagers first and foremost. And I think that's important to embrace and understand for ourselves, for educators, for people at every level. So I would really just encourage people to, if you're disagreeing on like a policy or the best strategy for getting something done, take a step back and I don't know, go for a walk, do something that's socially distanced and safe, but really just understand that relationships, not just at the teenage age, but really anytime, is number one most important in my eye. And I think building those kind and inclusive relationships are so important.
I want to ask another question from the audience now to our educators. Have you ever been accused of using your students to further a cause that you're interested in? And if so, how have you handled it? And if not, is it something you ever worry about? So again, the question is about co-opting student activism and student movement to advance a personal political agenda.
I've not had that experience, but I do think about it whenever I put together materials or resources. I often teach with the news, which means that I'm bringing in the topic of the day. And oftentimes those are things that not everybody feels should be addressed in a classroom. But I feel it's important because young people want to know, they have questions, they want a deeper understanding of what's going on in the world right now. And so I feel that I do try to make sure that whenever I present information, I'm presenting facts. It's not my specific belief system, not my specific thought process about what they should believe, but I'm giving them facts, I'm providing context, I'm building background knowledge, and I'm giving them the tools to find additional information on their own. And that's how I feel I'm able to sort of utilize my position in a way where I'm broadening perspectives and helping kids see, how does this issue or incident or moment fit within the larger scope of American society and history.
Thank you. I think it's super important for us to continue to return to, one of the points that you made very early on in the conversation, the importance of actually, number one, involving the students and being the vessel through which they do their work sometimes, or being a resource for them, as opposed to having things originate through you and be completed by you, the educator. But I also think it's particularly important in these polarized times for us to continue to seek out balanced information and allow all of our learners to come to their own conclusions. as educators, and there has been temptation when I was a teacher as well. For those who don't know, I've been an educator for 10 years before taking on this civics program role. And I know there were a lot of contentious issues, and specifically as a Black man, there were a lot of issues recently related to social justice and racial justice where I've wanted to share what I think and how I feel. And there's a time and place for that. But first and foremost, we do need to give our students information. Educators in the audience, give them the facts first, let them come to their own conclusions, let them get in dialogue and conflict and tension with one another, find some sort of consensus. And then afterward, I actually don't see harm in sharing your perspectives, but constantly challenging them to say, well, where do you disagree with me? Someone in the comments recently said, and I'm gonna butcher it because I can't find it, but DK Holland said, Norman Lear once said, I am the peer of whoever I'm speaking with. And so this is definitely something that we want to embrace. You know, right now I'm speaking to you and I might be wrong. So our last question before we transition to closing out is, again, for all of you, this work at times can be exhausting. This work at times can feel very lonely. How do you ensure that you are recharging and taking care of yourself? What systems or resources do you use to make sure that your activism is sustainable long-term?
I can.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay. Mine is short. Mine is really short. I'm just gonna say check-ins. Like, I think that when you're working with people to do the same, like when you're trying to accomplish a common goal with people, sometimes like at least once a month, you should like check in and have some sort of accountability so that you just know that you're all working towards the same goal and just keeping tabs on like what you're doing when it comes to organizing work. Because sometimes it can get a little bit like mixed up.
Yeah, definitely. I also agree. Like for me personally, there are certain times where I do feel overworked or like there's a lot going on. So I usually try to take a step back. I try to, in a way, I try to modify the work that I'm doing through my schedule, like taking a week off or try to do it on certain days of the week. I'm just gonna show you my calendar. So I highly recommend anyone to invest in a giant calendar, because so you can see, like, I mean, it's a lot on it, but you can see, you know, what certain times of day you're free, what certain times you can like swap out and see just what's your main task of the day. And that way, I think by organizing yourself and organizing these events or times where you have to do certain like deadlines and all, like you feel more at ease to know that, and also just communicate with your team and your mentors are there to, or whoever is there to support you, because I'm sure they also understand this very much. And yeah, this is all a community effort, a collaborative effort, and everyone totally is there to support you.
I definitely agree with Medina. I think organization is very important. It helps you stay prepared. It's hard sometimes with everything that goes on, but I think it's important to remember you're working to change things that need working on. It's important to remember you're doing this for the good of everyone else. You're doing this for, you know, to help everyone be better. I think you should definitely prioritize your mental health, because it's hard to do this kind of stuff without, you know, being okay. And I think that helps a lot, prioritizing yourself. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. I want to express truly how humbling it is to be a participant in this conversation. You all have brought such powerful perspectives and experiences that I am quite confident all of our attendees are going to benefit from and bring back to their communities, and will shape their thinking as we continue to ensure that we are empowering our young folks to take the lead. With that, I do want to thank also our panelists, thank our attendees and our panelists one more time, because we're deeply grateful to you all. But please do stay tuned for recordings of earlier sessions and for additional resources for action. And we invite you to join us for our final webinar in the Mending the Fabric of Democracy series, a call to action, a conversation with leaders and decision makers. It will feature New York State Commission of Education, Betty Rosa, and New York State Commissioner of Education, and New York State Senator Shelley Nair, Chair of the Senate Education Committee, and others. That will be on March 25th, 4 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all again for joining us.